15-year-old Maria knew she wouldn't be allowed into the concert venue because she came barefoot, but she decided to try anyway. But when Elvis spotted her in the crowd, and the magical transformation he would create on stage would not only make Maria a part of music history, but also give her a life beyond her wildest dreams. The Las Vegas International Hotel stood like a glittering palace against the Nevada desert sky on that warm September evening in 1975, its towering structure reaching toward the stars with the promise of dreams fulfilled and fortunes made. Inside its legendary showroom, 2,000 of the most devoted Elvis fans in the world had gathered for what would become one of the most talked-about concerts in the King's career. But none of them could have predicted that the evening's most memorable moment would come not from Elvis himself, but from a 15-year-old girl with calloused bare feet and a heart full of desperate hope. Maria Gonzalez stood at the edge of the hotel's marble entrance, her thin frame trembling, not from the desert evening's chill, but from a mixture of anticipation, fear, and the crushing weight of her own circumstances. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, clean but lacking the styled perfection of the other concert-goers streaming past her. Her dress, though carefully mended and pressed, showed the unmistakable signs of many wears and careful repairs, but it was her feet that marked her most clearly as different from the well-dressed crowd surrounding her, bare, dusty from the long walk from the bus station, and already showing the small cuts and bruises that came from navigating city streets without protection. Maria had traveled over 300 miles to reach this moment, a journey that had taken every penny she had managed to save over the past 8 months. She had worked after school and on weekends, cleaning houses for wealthy families in her small town, taking any job that would pay her enough to slowly accumulate the money needed for a bus ticket to Las Vegas and the cheapest concert ticket she could find. The ticket, purchased through a mail order that had required her to send cash in an envelope, was now carefully folded and tucked into the small purse she carried, her most precious possession, and the key to what she hoped would be the most important night of her life. The Gonzalez family had been struggling with poverty for as long as Maria could remember. Her father, Juan, worked construction when he could find jobs, but steady employment was rare in their small desert community. The construction industry in their area was seasonal and unpredictable, with long stretches of unemployment that forced the family to rely on whatever savings they could scrape together during the better months. Her mother, Carmen, cleaned houses and took in sewing to help make ends meet, her fingers constantly working to repair clothes and alter hand-me-downs to fit her 5 children. Maria was the eldest, and she felt the weight of that responsibility every day as she watched her younger siblings go without things that other children took for granted. The Gonzalez household was a testament to making do with very little. Their small adobe house, inherited from Juan's grandmother, had been built in the 1920s and showed every year of its age. The roof leaked during the rare desert storms, creating a pattern of water stains on the ceiling that mapped their financial struggles like a topographical chart of hardship. The plumbing was temperamental, requiring careful coaxing to produce hot water, and the electrical system was a patchwork of repairs that Juan had learned to manage through necessity rather than training. Despite these challenges, Carmen maintained their home with a pride that inspired all her children. She grew vegetables in a small garden behind the house, coaxing tomatoes and peppers from the reluctant desert soil through careful watering and constant attention. The family meals might be simple, but they were prepared with love and served on plates that Carmen had collected one at a time from church sales and community donations. Each plate told its own story of previous owners and different circumstances, creating a mismatched set that somehow felt more welcoming than any expensive dinnerware could have been. Maria's siblings, Rosa, age 13, Miguel, age 11, little Carmen, named after her mother, age 8, and baby Diego, just 5, each handled the family's poverty in their own way. Rosa had inherited their mother's practical nature and helped with the household chores without complaint, understanding even at her young age that everyone needed to contribute for the family to survive. survive. Miguel channeled his frustration into sports, spending hours kicking a worn soccer ball against the side of their house, dreaming of someday playing professionally and lifting his family out of their circumstances. Little Carmen was the family optimist, somehow managing to find joy in the simplest things and reminding everyone that happiness didn't have to cost money. Baby Diego was too young to understand their situation, which was perhaps a blessing, allowing him to approach each day with the pure enthusiasm that only very young children possess. It had been 2 months ago when Maria's worn-out shoes had finally given up completely, the soles separating from the uppers in a way that made them impossible to repair. The choice had been simple but heartbreaking. Use the little money the family had to buy Maria new shoes, or buy school supplies for her younger brothers and sisters who were starting the new academic year. Maria had made the decision herself, telling her parents that she could manage without shoes for a while, that her education was complete enough for her to start working full-time soon anyway. The moment when Maria's shoes finally fell apart had been both expected and devastating. She had been walking home from her job cleaning the Henderson family's large house when she felt the familiar separation starting along the left sole. By the time she reached her own front door, both shoes were beyond any repair that Juan's skilled hands could manage. She had sat on the front steps of their house, holding the worn leather pieces and trying not to cry, knowing that this moment represented more than just the loss of footwear. The conversation with her parents that evening had been one of the most difficult in Maria's young life. Carmen had immediately suggested that they find a way to buy new shoes for Maria, perhaps by taking in extra sewing or asking for an advance on Juan's next construction job. But Maria could see the worry lines around her mother's eyes and knew that her parents were already stretched beyond their limits. The school supply list for her siblings included items that seemed luxurious to a family struggling to put food on the table: new notebooks, pencils, calculators for Miguel's math classes, and art supplies for little Carmen's creative projects. Maria had made her decision with a maturity that broke her parents' hearts. "I can go without shoes for a while," she had said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Rosa and Miguel and little Carmen need those supplies for school more than I need new shoes. I'll figure something out." Juan had tried to argue, insisting that there had to be another way, but Maria had been firm in her resolve. She knew that her education was less critical than her siblings at this point, since she was already planning to leave school and work full-time as soon as she turned 16. The decision had been practical, but it had also been a turning point in how Maria saw herself and her place in the world. Walking barefoot through their small desert town marked her as different, as someone who came from the kind of poverty that made other people either pity her or look away in discomfort. She learned to navigate the rougher streets carefully, to avoid the glass and debris that could cut her feet, and to plan her routes to minimize the time spent on hot pavement during the worst parts of the day. But walking barefoot had become more than just an economic necessity for Maria. It had become a symbol of everything she felt was wrong with her life. She was intelligent, hardworking, and filled with dreams that seemed impossible to achieve from her position at the bottom of society's ladder. She loved music with a passion that surprised even her, often staying up late at night listening to an old radio that picked up stations from distant cities, absorbing every song and every melody as if they were lifelines, connecting her to a world where beauty and possibility still existed. Elvis Presley had become more than just a musical idol to Maria. He represented everything she longed for but believed was forever out of her reach. His voice carried a power and emotion that spoke to something deep inside her, and his story of rising from poverty to unprecedented fame gave her hope that perhaps someday circumstances could change for people like her. She had read every magazine article about him she could find, memorized the lyrics to every song, and dreamed of seeing him perform live with an intensity that sometimes frightened her with its desperation. When the announcement came that Elvis would be performing in Las Vegas, Maria knew with absolute certainty that she had to be there, regardless of the obstacles. She began saving money with a single-minded determination that impressed even her parents, though they worried about her obsessive focus on something that seemed so impossible. She worked longer hours, took on additional jobs, and carefully counted every penny as it accumulated in the small tin box she kept hidden under her bed. The news of Elvis's Las Vegas engagement had reached Maria through an old magazine she found while cleaning the Henderson family's house. Mrs. Henderson subscribed to several entertainment magazines, and she often gave Maria permission to read them while taking breaks from her cleaning duties. When Maria saw the announcement, her heart had started racing with a mixture of excitement and desperation. This was her chance, possibly her only chance, to see Elvis perform live. The logistics of getting to Las Vegas seemed almost insurmountable at first. Maria had never traveled anywhere beyond the boundaries of their small desert community, and Las Vegas might as well have been on another planet for all she knew about getting there. She began researching bus routes at the public library, using their ancient card catalog system and asking the librarian for help with transportation schedules. The cost of a round-trip bus ticket was staggering, more money than Maria typically saw in several months of work. But the concert ticket was an even bigger challenge. The cheapest seats available were still expensive by Maria's standards, and they had to be purchased by mail order with cash sent in an envelope. Maria had never made such a large financial transaction in her life, and the idea of putting all that money in the mail terrified her. What if the envelope got lost? What if the ticket office made a mistake? What if she saved all that money only to discover that the concert was sold out? Despite her fears, Maria began implementing a savings plan that required discipline she hadn't known she possessed. She started waking up an hour earlier each day to help local merchants with opening procedures, sweeping sidewalks, arranging merchandise, and cleaning windows before heading to school. After school, instead of going straight to her regular cleaning jobs, she would spend an hour collecting aluminum cans and glass bottles that she could redeem for deposit money. She took on additional babysitting duties for neighbors, often working late into the evening, watching younger children while their parents worked second jobs or attended community meetings. Every penny Maria earned went into the tin box under her bed, and she kept a careful written record of her progress toward her goal. She calculated and recalculated the total cost of the trip, bus ticket, concert ticket, food money, and a small emergency fund, adjusting her projections as prices changed and her savings grew. The math became an obsession, and she found herself thinking about nickels and dimes with the intensity that other teenagers reserved for romantic relationships or college plans. The journey to Las Vegas had been an adventure in itself. Maria had never traveled so far from home alone, and certainly never to a city as large and intimidating as Las Vegas. The bus ride had taken almost 8 hours, during which she sat pressed against the window, watching the landscape change from familiar desert terrain to the increasingly urban sprawl that surrounded the city. With each mile, her excitement grew, but so did her awareness of how out of place she was going to be among the sophisticated crowds that would surely fill the Elvis concert. Now, standing outside the hotel entrance, Maria felt the full weight of her decision pressing down on her. The other concert-goers moved past her in elegant dresses and polished shoes, their conversations filled with casual references to previous shows they had attended and hotel rooms they were staying in. She could see security guards stationed at various points around the entrance, their eyes scanning the crowd for potential problems, and she knew that her bare feet and obviously modest circumstances would mark her as exactly the kind of person they would want to keep out. But Maria had not come this far to turn back now. She had invested everything she had, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually, in this moment. If she was going to be rejected, at least she would know she had tried. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the entrance, her head held high despite her nervousness. The first security guard she encountered was a middle-aged man with kind eyes, who looked down at her with obvious concern. "Miss, I'm sorry, but there's a dress code for the showroom. You need to have appropriate footwear to enter." Maria had prepared for this moment, though she hadn't been sure exactly what she would say. "Sir, I have a ticket," she said, pulling the precious piece of paper from her purse. "I've traveled 300 miles to be here tonight. I know I don't look like the other people, but I love Elvis's music more than anything in the world, and this is the only chance I'll ever have to see him perform." The security guard looked at the ticket, then back at Maria's earnest face, and she could see him struggling with the situation. "Look, honey, I understand, and I can see this means a lot to you, but the hotel has policies, and they don't make exceptions. I'm sorry, but I can't let you in like this." Maria felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she was determined not to cry. "Please," she said quietly, "isn't there anything I can do? I'll stand in the back where no one will see me. I promise I won't cause any trouble." The guard's expression softened further, and Maria could see that he genuinely wished he could help her. "Tell you what," he said finally, "let me talk to my supervisor. Maybe we can figure something out. Can you wait here for a few minutes?" Maria nodded eagerly, hope flickering in her chest despite the rejection she had just experienced. She moved to a corner near the entrance where she could watch the steady stream of elegantly dressed people making their way into the hotel, each one representing the kind of life she could only dream about. As she waited, Maria overheard conversations that both fascinated and intimidated her. People discussed Elvis's recent performances, comparing this show to others they had attended, debating which songs he might perform, and sharing stories about previous encounters with the king himself. She realized that many of these people were not just fans, but regular attendees who followed Elvis from city to city, spending money on travel and accommodations that represented more than her family earned in several months. 20 minutes passed before the security guard returned, and Maria could see from his expression that the news was not going to be what she hoped to hear. "I'm really sorry, miss," he said gently. "My supervisor says the policy is firm. There just isn't any way to make an exception, even for someone with a valid ticket." The disappointment hit Maria like a physical blow. She had prepared herself intellectually for this possibility, but emotionally, she hadn't been ready for the finality of it. All those months of saving, all that planning and hoping, and now she was going to have to turn around and go home without even seeing the inside of the venue where Elvis would perform. "I understand," she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you for trying to help." As she turned to leave, Maria felt more defeated than she ever had in her life. The poverty that had always been a background reality suddenly felt like a prison, and she wondered if she would ever be able to escape the circumstances that seemed to define every opportunity she might hope for. But as she walked slowly away from the hotel entrance, something inside Maria refused to accept defeat entirely. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to simply give up without exploring every possible option. If she couldn't get into the main showroom, maybe there was somewhere else she could go to at least hear Elvis's voice, even if she couldn't see him perform. Las Vegas hotels, Maria knew from her research, were complex structures with multiple entrances and areas that might not be as closely monitored as the main showroom entrance. She began walking around the perimeter of the building, looking for any possible way to get closer to the music that meant so much to her. It was behind the hotel, near what appeared to be service entrances and loading docks, that Maria discovered something that made her heart race with new possibility. She could hear sound checks and musical instruments being tested, suggesting that this area was somehow connected to the performance spaces inside the hotel. More importantly, she could see that the security presence here was much lighter, with only occasional guards making rounds, rather than the constant monitoring she had observed at the main entrance. Maria found a spot behind some decorative landscaping where she could sit and wait without being immediately visible to anyone who might ask questions about her presence. From here, she could hear the preparations for the evening show, and while it wasn't the same as being inside the showroom, it was at least a connection to the event she had traveled so far to experience. As the sun set and the desert evening grew cooler, Maria wrapped her arms around herself and settled in to wait. She could hear sound technicians testing equipment, band members running through musical arrangements, and occasionally snippets of Elvis's voice as he worked through songs for the evening's performance. It wasn't the concert experience she had dreamed of, but it was something, and she was determined to be grateful for whatever ever connection to Elvis's music she could achieve. The sound check seemed to go on for hours, and Maria found herself becoming familiar with the rhythms and patterns of preparation that preceded a major performance. She could hear the technical conversations between crew members, the adjustment of instruments and sound equipment, and the gradual building of energy as showtime approached. Then, just as Maria was beginning to wonder if this distant listening post was going to be the extent of her Elvis experience, she heard something that changed everything. One of the crew members was discussing a problem with the sound system that affected the acoustics in certain parts of the main showroom. They needed to test the sound from different locations, including some areas that were accessible from the service areas where Maria was waiting. A few minutes later, a small group of technicians emerged from a door not far from Maria's hiding place, carrying portable sound equipment and talking about the need to run tests from various positions around the hotel. Maria realized that they were going to be moving in and out of the building through this service area, and that during these movements, the door would be opening and closing repeatedly. This was the opportunity Maria had been hoping for, though she hadn't dared to expect it. When the technicians were focused on their equipment and not paying attention to the door, she might be able to slip inside and find her way to somewhere she could actually see Elvis perform. Her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement, Maria waited for what seemed like the right moment. When the technicians were engaged in an intense discussion about equipment placement and had moved away from the door, she quickly and quietly slipped inside the building. The service corridors inside the hotel were a maze of hallways, storage areas, and utility spaces that Maria had never imagined existed. She could hear the sounds of the concert preparations much more clearly now, and she began following the sounds toward what she hoped would lead her to the showroom. After several wrong turns and moments of panic when she thought she might be discovered, Maria found herself in a corridor that seemed to run alongside the main showroom. Through small windows and doors marked "Staff Only," she could see glimpses of the elegant interior where well-dressed audience members were taking their seats in anticipation of Elvis's arrival. It was then that Maria made a discovery that seemed too good to be true. At the end of the corridor, there was a door that was slightly ajar, and through the opening, she could see directly into the showroom from what appeared to be a side stage area. If she could position herself in this location, she would have a perfect view of Elvis's performance, even though she wouldn't technically be in the audience seating area. Maria carefully positioned herself where she could see through the opening without being visible to the audience or the main stage crew. From this vantage point, she had an unobstructed view of the stage and could see Elvis clearly when he made his entrance. It wasn't the seat she had paid for, but it was infinitely better than listening from outside the building. As showtime approached, Maria felt her excitement building to almost overwhelming levels. She was actually going to see Elvis Presley perform live, despite every obstacle that had been placed in her way. The months of saving, the long bus journey, the rejection at the front entrance, and the risky exploration of the hotel's service areas had all led to this moment. When the lights dimmed and the familiar opening chords of Elvis's entrance music began to play, Maria felt tears of joy streaming down her face. This was really happening. She was really here, about to witness something she had dreamed about for so long that it had seemed more like fantasy than possibility. Elvis emerged from the wings in his iconic white jumpsuit, adorned with intricate beadwork that caught the stage lights like captured starlight. His presence filled the showroom with an energy that Maria could feel even from her hidden position. When he began to sing, his voice was even more powerful and emotionally resonant than she had imagined, and Maria found herself caught up in the magic of the performance with an intensity that made her forget everything else. For the first several songs of the set, Maria remained in her hidden position, absorbing every moment of the performance and feeling grateful beyond words for the opportunity to witness Elvis's artistry firsthand. She sang along softly with songs she had memorized from countless radio listening sessions, and she felt a connection to the music and to to Elvis that transcended the physical distance between her hiding place and the stage. But it was during Can't Help Falling in Love that the evening took a turn that would change Maria's life forever. As Elvis sang the romantic ballad, he began moving through the audience, shaking hands with fans and accepting flowers and other gifts. Maria watched in fascination as he connected personally with individual audience members, his genuine warmth and charisma evident in every interaction. As Elvis made his way around the showroom, he gradually moved closer to the side area where Maria was hidden. She pressed herself further back into the shadows, not wanting to be discovered and ejected from the hotel when she was so close to experiencing the complete concert. But then, as if guided by some invisible force, Elvis looked directly toward the area where Maria was concealed. Their eyes met across the crowded showroom, and for a moment that felt suspended in time. It was as if they were the only two people in the entire venue. Elvis stopped mid-song, his expression shifting from his professional performance mode to something that looked like genuine surprise and concern. He could see that Maria was not supposed to be where she was, but he could also see something in her face, a combination of desperation, joy, and pure love for music that seemed to touch something deep inside him. Without breaking eye contact with Maria, Elvis made a gesture for her to wait where she was. Then, continuing with his song but moving with obvious purpose, he made his way toward the side stage area where she was hidden. When Elvis reached the area near Maria's hiding place, he knelt down so he was at her eye level. "What's your name, darling?" he asked softly, his voice gentle and genuinely interested. "Maria," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound system and the murmur of the curious audience who were trying to understand what was happening. "Maria," Elvis repeated, as if testing how her name sounded. "How did you get back here, sweetheart?" The question Maria had been dreading was also the one she knew she had to answer honestly. "I couldn't get in the front way," she admitted, looking down at her bare feet. "They wouldn't let me in because I don't have shoes. So I found another way because I had to hear you sing." Elvis followed her gaze to her bare feet, and Maria saw his expression change to something that looked like a mixture of understanding and determination. "You came all this way without shoes just to hear me sing?" he asked. Maria nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes as she realized that she was about to be discovered and thrown out, probably just minutes away from the end of the concert. "I'm sorry I snuck in," she said. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I just wanted to hear your music so badly, and this was the only way I could do it." But instead of calling security or expressing anger at her deception, Elvis did something that stunned both Maria and the audience members who were close enough to witness the exchange. He stood up, took off his own white boots, and handed them to Maria. "Put these on," he said simply. Maria stared at the boots in amazement, unable to believe what was happening. "I can't take your shoes," she protested. "Yes, you can," Elvis said with a smile that seemed to light up the entire showroom. "And you're going to put them on, and then you're going to come out here and watch the rest of this show from right up front where you belong." The audience, which had been watching this exchange with growing fascination, erupted in applause and cheers as they realized what Elvis was doing. Maria, with shaking hands, put on Elvis's boots, which were far too large for her, but which felt like the most precious gift she had ever received. Elvis then took Maria's hand and led her out onto the main stage area, where the audience could see her clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced through his microphone, "I want you to meet a very special young lady named Maria. She traveled 300 miles to be here tonight, and she wasn't going to let anything, not even a little thing like not having shoes, keep her from hearing music she loves." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Maria felt overwhelmed by the positive energy coming from the audience. But Elvis wasn't finished with his gesture of kindness. "Maria," he said, turning back to her, "I want you to stay right here with me for the rest of the show, and tomorrow we're going to make sure you have everything you need to get home safely and comfortably." For the remainder of the concert, Maria stood beside Elvis on the stage, wearing his boots and feeling as if she were living in the most beautiful dream imaginable. Elvis would occasionally occasionally sing directly to her, and during instrumental breaks, he would talk with her about her journey to Las Vegas and her love of music. The audience loved having her there, treating her like a celebrity in her own right, and cheering for her as enthusiastically as they cheered for Elvis. But the true magic of the evening was yet to come. After the concert ended and the audience began to disperse, Elvis took Maria backstage to meet his band and crew. But more than introductions, he had plans that would transform Maria's life in ways she could never have imagined. "Maria," Elvis said as they sat in his dressing room, "you've got more courage and determination than most people twice your age. You've shown me tonight that music really can overcome any obstacle, and I want to do something for you." What Elvis proposed was beyond anything Maria could have dreamed. He wanted to arrange for her to have a full scholarship to a music school, where she could develop her own talents and perhaps one day become a performer herself. He also wanted to make sure that her family's immediate financial needs were taken care of, so that Maria could focus on her education without worrying about basic necessities like shoes and clothing. "But most importantly," Elvis continued, "I want you to remember tonight as proof that dreams can come true, even when they seem impossible. You didn't let poverty or rejection stop you from finding a way to experience something you love, and that's a strength that will serve you well throughout your life." The arrangements Elvis made for Maria went far beyond what he had initially described. Not only did he provide for her music education, but he also ensured that her entire family was relocated to a better situation where her father could find steady employment, and her younger siblings could attend better schools. Maria's story became national news, inspiring other young people who felt trapped by their circumstances to believe that determination and courage could open doors that seemed permanently closed. The scholarship Elvis arranged for Maria was not just any music education program, but enrollment at the prestigious Berklee College of Music in Boston, with full tuition, room and board, and even a living allowance that would allow her to focus entirely on her studies without worrying about working to support herself. The program would provide her with training in music theory, composition, performance, and music education, giving her the tools she would need to build a career in the industry she loved so much. But Elvis's generosity extended far beyond Maria herself. Understanding that her success would be meaningless if her family continued to struggle, he arranged for Juan Gonzalez to be hired by a construction company in Phoenix that specialized in commercial building projects. The job came with steady employment, health insurance for the entire family, and wages that were significantly higher than anything Juan had been able to find in their small desert community. Carmen was offered a position managing housekeeping services for a chain of boutique hotels, work that would allow her to use her organizational skills and attention to detail in a more formal business setting. The younger Gonzalez children would attend schools in Phoenix that offered programs and resources that had never been available in their hometown. Rosa would be able to join advanced academic programs that could prepare her for college, while Miguel would have access to organized sports teams and coaching that could help him pursue his athletic dreams. Little Carmen would be enrolled in art classes that would nurture her creative talents, and baby Diego would start his education in schools with modern facilities and experienced teachers. The logistics of relocating the entire Gonzalez family were handled by Elvis's management team with the same attention to detail they brought to organizing his concert tours. They arranged for temporary housing while the family searched for a permanent home, coordinated the transfer of school records and medical files, and even hired moving services to transport their belongings from their old house to their new life in Phoenix. Every aspect of the transition was planned to minimize stress and disruption for a family that had never imagined such dramatic changes were possible. The media attention surrounding Maria's story was initially overwhelming for a family that had always lived quietly on the margins of society. Reporters came to their small desert town to interview neighbors and teachers pictures, trying to understand how a girl from such humble circumstances had ended up sharing a stage with Elvis Presley. Photographers wanted pictures of the adobe house where Maria had grown up, the tin box where she had saved her money, and the worn magazines where she had first learned about Elvis's music. But rather than treating the Gonzalez family as a curiosity or object of pity, most of the media coverage focused on the inspirational aspects of Maria's story. Her determination to pursue her dreams, despite seemingly impossible obstacles, resonated with people across the country who were facing their own challenges. Letters began arriving from other young people who shared their own stories of poverty and ambition, thanking Maria for showing them that circumstances didn't have to determine destiny. Years later, when Maria had become a successful musician and music educator in her own right, she would often tell her students about the night she snuck barefoot into an Elvis concert and how that act of desperation became the turning point that changed everything. She would emphasize that while Elvis's kindness had been the catalyst for her transformation, it was her own refusal to accept defeat that had created the opportunity for that kindness to manifest. The boots Elvis had given her that night became one of Maria's most treasured possessions, displayed in her music studio as a reminder of the power of taking risks for things you believe in. She never wore them again, but she would often look at them when facing difficult decisions, remembering the courage it had taken to slip into that service entrance and the magic that had resulted from that act of determination. Maria's story became part of Elvis lore, told and retold as an example of the King's genuine compassion for his fans and his ability to see past surface circumstances to the heart of a person's character. But more than just an Elvis story, it became a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of not allowing external circumstances to define the limits of what might be possible. The transformation in Maria's life was not just about the opportunities Elvis provided, but about the confidence and self-worth she gained from realizing that her dreams were valid and achievable. The girl who had once felt invisible and worthless because of her poverty became a woman who understood that true value comes from within and that circumstances can change when courage meets opportunity. In interviews years later, Maria would always credit Elvis not just for his generosity, but for seeing something in her that she hadn't yet learned to see in herself. "He didn't just give me shoes," she would say. "He showed me that I was worthy of kindness, worthy of investment, worthy of dreams coming true. That lesson was worth more than any material gift could ever be." The ripple effects of that magical night continued to spread throughout Maria's life and the lives of those she touched. Her music students learned not just technical skills, but lessons about perseverance and self-advocacy. Her own children grew up understanding that obstacles were meant to be overcome, not accepted as permanent limitations. And somewhere in Las Vegas, the International Hotel still stands as a testament to the many magical nights when performers and audiences connected in ways that transcended mere entertainment. For Maria, it would always be the place where barefoot desperation became the foundation for a lifetime of success, where the courage to take a risk was rewarded beyond her wildest dreams, and where she learned that sometimes the most important doors are the ones you open for yourself.